Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Dr. Imholt here again. Today we're going to play physics, so we're not actually Tim today. I'm Dr. Imholt, and as my kids commonly remind me, I'm not a real doctor. I'm just a doctor of physics, so call me when you got a broken math equation. But Bill Sylvie's here, who is otherwise known as the Dungeon Delver, who actually worked for NASA for a while, but lives in Florida and has his whole life. So Bill, why don't you tell people what you did for Florida and just did for NASA and just how long you've lived in Florida around that area?
I've lived in Florida for 44 years now. I was a systems and networking administrator for NASA, which is a fancy way to say that I fix computers in most departments, which it seems a little boring, but I actually worked with the Boeing group that put in the first hardwired computer network infrastructure at NASA. The the desktop computers changed from the 70s until now, but the infrastructure, the actual wiring and cabling has remained the same. So you'd see funny things like somebody with a then top of the line Pentium computer with a network connection, but the network connection between the computer and an adapter is like this whole spaghetti mess of boxes, and then from an adapter to another adapter to plug into these then 30-year-old networking cables. So you'd have these very modern PCs plugged into these very not modern cables, but it worked. It worked.
So we'll get to why that is in a minute, but today we're kind of talking about the moon hoax, the moon landing. Was it a hoax or was it not? And there are a large number of people, as I discovered the other day on one of the social media platforms, that when you say I can't believe, I all I did was say something simple like I can't believe there's still people that think the moon landing was a hoax, and the amount of hate I got for actually believing that we landed was pretty interesting.
Well,
And
Tim, let me ask you something, Tim. Tim, do you believe in Switzerland?
sure,
Have you ever been to Switzerland, Tim? Do you know
no,
anyone who's been to Switzerland? How do
uh,
you know the whole thing was it just a fake filmed in the Cascade Mountains, Tim?
couldn't tell you. I know people who claim to have been there, but
You know people. Sure you do, Tim.
and they do say they make nice watches there, but those could just be German watches kind of being labeled as Swiss because we do have a 180-year-old sort of challenge with the Germans. So,
Germany's in on it, dude. We bought them off. We
oh, that's
let
right.
them be
After the
in
war, we
NATO and
own
they make
Germany. It's like a tax spot for us, right? So,
exactly. They make watches as part of their NATO agreement to suppress the truth about Switzerland.
exactly. So let's dive into this moon landing. And I actually have a page of notes here. I was watching a conversation that a guy named Bart Sibrel had, who
Oof.
he's one of the
Diving
leading.
into the deep end, are we,
I
Tim?
know, right? He's one of the leading moon, debunkers about this whole thing. And the one thing I can tell you is throughout this hour and a half, it was a 3 hour conversation he had online. I can only tolerate the first hour and a half of it. And in that first hour and a half, he tried to sell me a book about 40 times and tried to send me to his website to go pay for the paywall another 10 times. Because of course, you want to pay him for all of his debunking. And I get that. I've written books. I want people to buy them, but my books are fiction. His are apparently fiction as well, but he tries to pass them
Mhm.
off as real. And one of his first things he says out the gate is, look, we can't do it today. Therefore, they couldn't do it in the 1960s. And since you were at NASA and I've been around, I've actually built things that have been in space. I got a sensor that was up there. I've got some other stuff I've done that have flown suborbital, but still in that threshold. But the safety standards in 1960 versus the safety standards today are the why we can't. And the different, well, it's not really we can't, but the other thing is just because we aren't doing something doesn't mean we can't do something. But I will tell you that the Saturn V, if we were producing them today based on NASA safety standard today, that thing would not be allowed on the launch pad. I mean,
That is
you
essentially correct. Yes.
yeah, I mean, it was a dangerous pile of liquid rocket fuel that they're like, it's the only way we know how to do it right now. We got to get there first. Let's go, right? and threw it up there, and sure enough, it worked. And I've met a couple of people who were astronauts who were Apollo, and one who was Mercury actually. And I asked them the same question. I'm like, so, when they come to you guys and they say, hey, you're all test pilots, you all know how to fly, you all fly dangerous stuff. And they come to you and say, hey, look, we're going to take these brand new things called rockets, these ICBMs, and we're going to take the warhead off and put you on. And you thought it was a good idea? And the action of all of them at the same time was like, yeah, they didn't really phrase it like that. But it was the Cold War. It's a much different time, right? I'm in my 50s. I kind of remember the Cold War, but the Berlin Wall came down when I was young. So, we lived under it, but when you're a kid or a teenager, you don't really understand it the way your parents do, or the way, the people who were astronauts in the 60s do, people who fought World War II. It was a much different mindset of people, and they would take those risks. And those are risks we are not willing to take today. I mean, you can't, I mean, look at the way we build cars now versus we built cars then. The safety standard to today were not the safety standards of back then. You wouldn't be able to produce a 66 Chevy Nova today. The car dealers would be shut down in a second. So
Mhm.
the other thing that this guy come out and said was, oh, look, the government lied about other stuff. Therefore, they're automatically lying about the moon. And he cited MK Ultra, which was this program to give LSD to people and test it out and some other weird stuff. But sure, they hid some things they're doing. And yes, the government has lied about things, and they probably lied about the Gulf of Tonkin incident and some other stuff. The Kennedy assassination has still got things that we don't know, but that does not mean that they lied about the moon landing. You can't say this, therefore, oh, look over here, right? Don't look behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Um, this is the one that absolutely got me. And Bill, I think you're going to have some fun stuff to say about this. His claim was that the whole moon landing was filmed in a studio at an Air Force base, and there were only three witnesses. Only three people knew they did this. So all we have are these three guys that knew that happened. How the hell are you gonna fake out 500,000 NASA employees? All of them think they're sending somebody to the moon, not to mention all the subcontractors.
Yeah, you're not going to. You're absolutely not going to. And let's take a case in point. Tim, do you watch the History Guy on YouTube? I'm,
No,
I'm
I don't.
blatantly shilling. History Guy is absolutely fantastic, and I wish I'd known you were going to do this video today, because I would reference in a video from earlier in the week. The crew of Apollo 15 got in a tremendous amount of administrative trouble because so every spaceflight crew is allowed X amount of personal cargo they can take up with them.
Yeah, and it's not much.
And
It's
yeah, the
tiny.
the early Mercury crews, which the guys, Grissom and everybody else, they would stuff their pockets and every spare nook and cranny of their flight suits with crap that they could bring back home and give away or sell. And NASA very quickly stopped that because they thought it was unseemly to have to have astronauts basically turning around and selling souvenirs. So they established a process for that. And in Apollo 15, the process was, or rather, the things they took, the crew all got together and said, "Hey, envelopes and stamps are really, 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 really lightweight. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our names on a bunch of envelopes. We're going to stick a bunch of lunar mission stamps on these envelopes, and then when we get picked up by the carrier, we're going to rush to the post office on the carrier and have all these things canceled, and then we're going to give them away to friends." But giving them away to friends turned into, well, friend A over there takes his envelopes and he sells them, and then he gives some of the money back to the astronaut. Big, big, big no.
I,
Here's the
it,
thing.
what's actually funny is I have some of those in my father's stamp collections. I
Yeah.
have two of them
You,
actually.
so you
They're
know
they're out there on the market. I should probably find one and post a picture of it. But
the crew of Apollo 15 was fired for it. The
wow,
crew of Apollo 15 never flew in space again because it was considered such an egregious breach of policy, which I think was wrong. They did not knowingly give these things to people who were going to flip them to collectors, but it happened. But we can have that discussion later. Tim, You are on top of the world. You are riding high one day, and the next day, because of some stupid political BS, you are told you will never experience that again. Your name is mud. You're going to get dragged. You're going to get embarrassed in front of Congress. Forget it. You're out. You're done. What is your incentive to keep your mouth shut?
Zero, like none, because your
I could
career's
sit
over,
here.
right?
I could spend from now until 5 o'clock tonight trashing just
So,
two
so those guys would have
people
blown
that
the
I've
hoax right
worked
there,
for.
right? I mean, it just absolutely would have blown the hoax. And this
Yeah.
guy, Bart Siebel, I mean, let's go on. So my other question is, he's like, only 3 people knew we faked it. Okay, I have a question for you. We've all seen documentary footage of mission control where they show telemetry data, they show all this stuff of people going to the moon, coming back. Who wrote the simulation software that faked all those guys out if only 3 people knew we faked it?
Yeah.
Falls apart right there, right? I mean, it's like, okay, I get it. And with the amount of money they poured into NASA, or if you adjust it for inflation, it's insane. But with the amount of money they poured into NASA, it would be cheaper to just go to the freaking moon than it would be to just spend all this money on a fake, right? I mean, it's just insane. Not to mention the fact that Russia, the USSR, was still the USSR, and they were trying to get to the moon first. They would have blown that hoax wide open on us, right? In like 2 seconds. So the other question that comes up is the radiation Van Allen belts. Okay, and they're like, oh, we couldn't have survived the radiation because look, the
Oh,
LIM
I got a
had these
response
really.
for this one too, but go
Oh,
ahead.
I got one for this. So 2 things. They're like, oh, look, the walls on the LIM were so thin they couldn't stop the radiation inside the Van Allen belts. First off, the Van Allen belts are just that, they're a belt, they're not uniform. If you calculate different things throughout those Van Allen belts, you get different answers in different spaces. That's number one. Number two, there was this other part of the spacecraft that wasn't very thin like the LIM that those guys could be in while they passed through that space that was much thicker. That survived. That actually supplied a large amount of shielding from some radiation. Third, if you do the math, they went through those Van Allen belts so freaking fast, the overall exposure was not that much, right? So they used speed as their advantage. Just like, screw it, we're going to go quick, right? And we're going to get through it fast and be done. So go ahead. What's your comment on the Van
So
Allen belts?
there's a couple of it is a nice hot sunny day here in Florida, the Sunshine State.
Mhm.
And before we did this video, I took uh my dog out for a walk. Um, you will note, Tim, that I am not like blistered red. That I'm like my skin is not peeling. I am not in agony. But wait, I was out in the sun. Won't you get sunburned if you go out in the sun? Yeah, if I had stood out there for 5 hours on the sidewalk, yes, I would be sunburned. My exposure time outside was limited. It was limited. I was not exposed to the radiation of the sun outside long enough to suffer any injury. There are people alive today who were working at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant on April 26, 1986, and were around that reactor, in proximity of that reactor, when it was blown open to the atmosphere and exposed to far, far more intense and deadly forms of radiation than the Apollo astronauts.
So let's go through that one for a second. First off, I agree with you because I've actually read about Chernobyl quite extensively because I am a physicist and I used to work in nuclear physics, and you read about the disasters.
Sure.
Um, that one, if you stood in the wrong spot, there's people right now that are going to watch this video and go, oh my God, but if you were in this spot, yeah, if you were in this spot, you would have died. If you were in that other spot, you would have died. Look at the picture of the helicopter crashing. Yeah, it was right above the open stack without that shielding equipment around it. So it did have shielding in different spots. It wasn't completely open. It was open and you had certain zones. If you went into, you were just dead in seconds.
Mhm.
3 Mile Island, one of the biggest disaster to ever take place in the United States, total of 0 casualties. Fukushima, I think there were 3, but I can't remember, so I'll give you 8. Right. But Fukushima was an old reactor style that hadn't been well maintained, built on a fault line near the coast. right? So, you got all these problems with people are going to bring up those things in relation to this, and it's not at the same, you can't say this, therefore that. Completely different equation. And radiation is not the same in all cases. You've got all kinds of different forms of radiation. And when you look at the forms inside the Van Allen belt, it's a completely different type of radiation. It's not something a lot of people understand, and I can go on for hours trying to explain it. And someday I'll do a video explaining different types of radiation, but not today. Um, the other different one, the other one I absolutely love is they come up and they come up with these theories that talk about the people going up and down, and there's one I'm going to get to in a minute that Bill doesn't know I'm going to talk about. I don't think you've heard, but it's going to make your head explode. But let's look at some pictures first, because
All right.
normally people go 180 degrees away and say, "Oh, look over here, therefore that," right? Like, hey, look, oranges are orange, therefore apples can't possibly be red. It's not the way this stuff works. So let's look at a few pictures. So the first one was, who took the video of Neil Armstrong coming down the ladder? I had this conversation with somebody on Twitter earlier today. Somebody was there long before us. I'm not saying that this person actually was trying to convince me that because, yes, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, but he wasn't first. Therefore, NASA's lying to us and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Because who took that video? Well, a camera just like the one you see here was mounted underneath the LEM,
Yeah.
and they turned it on. It's just the way it works. Okay. And they use that to transmit pictures back to Earth. So there you see Neil coming down the ladder. Nobody had to get there first. They're capable of figuring out where to mount a camera. It's not that hard. I get that people want it to be somebody else had to set up the camera. However, Occam's razor, which was more likely, someone was there first, or they mounted a camera where it would be useful to the guys inside the craft.
It was a selfie stick.
It was a
Now
selfie
that's
stick. Yeah,
when it was a selfie
it was
stick. If I show video of me walking around by myself outside, that's not fake. That's not a digital fake.
How do we
I
know
have a
you didn't
camera
fake
on
it?
a
My
stick.
background's fake. I mean, how do we know you didn't? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Tim, are
Uh,
you in space? Are you in
no,
space
I'm not.
now, Tim?
I'm in Frisco, Texas, and the space background's cooler than my house. Um, the all right, so let's look at the next one. So this one's going to blow everybody's mind, I know. So a lot of people, a lot of countries are start to send stuff up to orbit the moon. Okay. And I can hear somebody right now going, oh, look, yeah, we sent something up to space to go through the Van Allen belts and orbit the moon. We had sent mannequins. So if we're only sending mannequins now, that must mean we couldn't possibly send humans in the 60s. Again, safety standards. It's just different today than it was. And we're trying to get there with today's safety standards versus the 60s safety standards. So, yes, NASA tests things with mannequins. It happens. Let it go. But the nation of India sent an orbiter up to take a bunch of pictures of the moon for different scientific reasons. And they captured this. That's the Apollo 11 lunar module. That's the Apollo 12 lunar module. And they captured that in 2021. Let's get a little closer look up at that. You can see there's the limb legs. There's, all kinds of stuff. There it is, Apollo 11, right where it's supposed to be. Are you shocked? I'm
I,
not shocked.
I'm not shocked.
There's Apollo 12 right where it's supposed to be, right? I mean, this stuff is not shockingly surprising, but this is the one that absolutely is going to drive Bill crazy, and I'm going to tee it up and I'm going to let your head explode just to see where it goes. The same guy, Bart Sibrel, who brings up some rational points of, oh, look, we can fake this. But then he turns around and says, because we can fake it, that must mean they faked it. Well, okay, if you can fake an image, that doesn't necessarily mean the one NASA sent you is faked. That just means that you can fake an image. Okay. I'm not buying it. Just because you can do something doesn't mean NASA did do something. And then he tries to dress these conspiracies, this whole thing up as patriotism. Well, people want to believe we landed for patriotic reasons, and true patriots, and he actually said this, would question their government and try to get them to say the right thing. And that was what was happening on Apollo 11. Those guys called that thing a lemon, and they were bringing in lemons and putting it in there. And then the next day they died. But the night before, the CIA went in and they changed the door from where it opened outward to where it opened inward. And that was a CIA change last minute overnight in the command module. And those guys were questioned and they pressurized it with pure oxygen. And when you pressurize something with pure oxygen, even metal will catch fire. Therefore, it was the CIA killing those guys before they let the hoax out of out of secret and into the public eye. So, Bill, I will leave that one to you because
Wow.
I
Okay. So
laughed harder at that one than I haven't anything in a long time.
let's let's break this down more than the mental breakdown that Bart Seabrill's having. Um,
Oh, and he had one more after that. I'll get to in a
the
second. It gets better.
First of all, I want to talk about the 50,000 foot view here, as far as the government does bad things, therefore the government does lots of bad things. Uh, and I will tell you guys, Tim probably gets frustrated with me because I tend to get a little bit more black pilled when it comes to matters of the government. I'm one of those people. He probably wants to wing that coffee mug at my head when I start up about
I like this
things.
coffee mug. We're gonna keep that. Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, a coffee mug you don't like, an empty wine bottle, something, and that's why there's like 1,100 miles between us. You can't hit me from there. But although I guess you could build something to launch it at me anyway.
I used to work on Patriot Missile. I can figure something out.
There you go. Yeah. But Tim, you mentioned MK Ultra earlier. The the federal government, the people operating inside the federal government, had a vested interest in nobody finding out about MK Ultra, about CONINTELPRO. They had a vested interest in keeping that secret. The entirety of the space program was on display from the moment we tried to start launching Vanguard to today. It is a point of pride for the United States. It is constantly on display. They bring senators, they bring congresspeople, they bring Boy Scouts, they bring nuns, they bring school children. They walk them through this thing. At last count, the number of people that were in control of MK Ultra, CONINTELPRO, things like that wanted to organize tour groups to come and have a looky-loo is hovering somewhere around zero. There's still parts of that are redacted. If the true patriot, as Bart Seabrill would have you believe, constantly question this stuff, literally millions of people have been through the halls of NASA. I worked at the SSPF and the ONC buildings, and if you know, you know. Okay, nobody. Tim, I literally could have walked anywhere. There are no secret. There's a badge to get you on to Cape Kennedy. That's it.
Do you know how many people would have to be in the loop for them to get to the command module and change the door from opening outward to opening inward? I mean, the number of people that would have had to have seen that go on would be astounding to me. How many mechanical engineers would have to come up with the drawings? Changing out a door from opening one way to the other in my house is, a multiple hour project. Doing it on a freaking spacecraft? That's insane.
It beggars belief. But to get back to the matter of the Apollo 1 fire and the Apollo and what.
Oh, the other thing he said, I completely forgot about this. I had to look at my notes. He claimed that the CIA put oily rags underneath Gus Grissom's chair. Underneath the pilot's chair, to start fire there.
They didn't. So, Mr. Metal will burn in a pure oxygen atmosphere.
But they needed oily rags.
We needed something that will, like, maybe start a fire. Oily rags will maybe spontaneously combust, but they needed that in a pure oxygen atmosphere. One of the harsh lessons from the Apollo 1 fire was regarding Velcro.
It was.
Velcro was so useful that both the crew and the engineers absolutely 110% believed that just cover everything we can in Velcro because, God, it's so useful. Nobody stopped to think about the fact that it's essentially wool stuck to the wall with organic glue. All right. There's your quote unquote oily rags. And as far as the lemon condition of the spacer, yes, they were Grissom and crew, Grissom, Chaffee, and White were frustrated with the fact that NASA had go fever and were not implementing engineering changes that they thought were intrinsic to the functioning of the aircraft. Pilots bitch about aircraft all the time.
Race car
We had a
drivers bitch
plane.
about their race car all the time. I mean, it's just
We had
part
a
of the deal.
plane, Tim, in the 50s. We had a plane called the XF-80, it was XF-85
Mhm.
Goblin.
Oh
It
yeah.
was it was shaped like an egg. It had stubby, it looked like a cartoon. And they said, okay, we're going to stick this in the bomb bay of a B-29 or of a B-36. And if we have to fly missions to Russia, you know, if there's a nuclear war and we have to fly bombers to Russia because ICBMs weren't really a thing yet, the bombers will need defending. So one or two
Talk about this
bombers
guy
are
right
going
here.
to, there it is. There it is. Ridiculous thing. So it's gonna be tucked up in the bomb bay. And then when Russians send up planes to stop our bombers, haha, joke's on you. Bomb bay opens up. A bunch of these things fly out, engage the Russian fighters, and then fly back up, connect to what they call the trapeze boom, and then
Yeah.
get pulled back inside, and they'll all knock back a cup of Joe and whatever. It was garbage. It
Ludicrous
was a
design.
stupid it was a stupid concept. It was a terrible plane, and the pilots who flew it knew it was bad. They knew it was a bad idea, and they knew it was poorly executed, and the plane was poorly designed, and they said so. They bitched about it constantly. That doesn't mean there was a CIA fix in to kill the pilots who flew that plane.
I,
And
I just
thankfully, none of them died, but they all complained about how bad that plane was and that
I
they didn't want to fly it.
just having worked with engineers, most my whole career and understanding it well enough to say, look, changing a door on a spacecraft like that, if you're going to pressurize it to the points they were pressurizing that thing at, that's not a small task. That's not an overnight task for a couple of guys that just go
No,
in with a hacksaw and hope for the best, right? That's not the way that stuff works. It's way more intricate than that. And the number of people that would have to be looped on that one is crazy. So, if you look at Bart and his arguments, he's got a couple of things that like, well, okay, we can fake it, therefore they must have. That's sort of hand wavy, but at least he's living in the land of sort of kind of understandable, unless you really start to dig into the details. Which, by the way, there was a great MythBusters episode on some of the stuff even he was talking about that completely debunked it. But the other one that got me was that he kind of undoes all the really interesting stuff he talks about. That's like, okay, great. You think that great? Let's have that discussion. Let's talk about it. Let's walk this through. And then he comes up with this Apollo 1 thing and he just completely, loses credibility. The other one he came up with that was kind of in the same vein, it was not as bad as the Apollo 1 stuff, but remember, this is late 60s technology, right? And part of it, he goes on to say, oh, look, they faked it on some Air Force base. And then he comes back later on and says, oh, yeah, it was all computer generated. Dude, which one was it? Did they do it on an Air Force base or was it computer generated? And have you any idea what computer generated imagery would have looked like in the 1960s? Because in the 1980s, we had max headroom was about the best we could do, right?
and that was the late 80s.
It was the late
I
80s, right? This was talking the late 60s here.
And Max Headroom was, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, okay, well, Max Headroom was Matt Frewer in a
Mhm.
shiny costume with some post processing. All right,
Yeah.
Max Headroom was not CGI.
No.
Background behind him was the only CGI in Max Headroom.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a movie that Disney did one that had some of the first footage that was actually generated by computer called Tron. And if you look carefully, it was really limited on how much they did, and it was really limited on colors. And that was what, early 80s, like 82, 83 somewhere.
Yeah.
Uh,
Tron was 82,
yeah,
and people in their minds overestimate how much CGI is in Tron. There's
then
like
not much.
no, there's
There's
like a
a,
grand total of 11 minutes of
yeah.
computer imagery in Tron.
Yeah, and most of it is actual sets, but there's
Yeah,
a couple of images of the ships and things that are computer generated. But even that was Herculean at the time, and that
yeah.
was 80s, right? It was, years later. And one of the other things that a lot of people, I looked at some of the conspiracy websites on this, and my head almost exploded a couple times. And some people were like, "Well, yeah," and this is one that I think, Bill, you might have some opinions on. Well, computer equipment going through that radiation field. I'm going to explain a couple things here. The computer equipment that everybody's used to seeing that they're talking about going through some of those radiation fields, like my iMac, my gaming PC over there, my son's laptop, that's not the computer equipment they had up in space. They had very discrete circuits and open and closed metal switches. To flip a bit in one of those computers is a much different task than to accidentally flip a bit in one of these computers, because these are a lot different and a lot more sensitive than those were. Those were more rudimentary, but if you look at them from a robustness standpoint, some of those things I could have thrown down a staircase and whacked with a sledgehammer for a few minutes,
Yeah.
and you could turn that damn thing on, it's going to start. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. This is stuff that was designed to survive you know, multiple G's. The AGC, the Apollo Guidance Computer, is fascinating. There's a whole series on YouTube. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole, guys, check out the refurbishing and powering up Apollo Guidance Computer. Some guys got one together. I don't mean that
And
they didn't run an emulator. They got the parts
the
of
original
one
parts
together, the
and the
original
shit,
parts,
and the thing
some of
still
which,
worked.
yeah, yeah, it still works.
And that's
So
and that so I worked in the defense industry for a long time, and whether it was on the university side funded by defense, or in defense itself. And everybody's like, oh, defense equipment is 20 years out of date, 25 years out of date compared to consumer. Well, the reason is it has to be really robust. You have to be able to put it on a shelf and have it not turn on for 10 years, instantly turn it on and have it up and running without question. So it's not going to be the latest and greatest technology, because you need to know that thing's going to work. And
well,
that's why when
here's
you
something. I was just gonna say, here's something in your field, Tim. There are computers in the nose of a Patriot missile, right?
eh,
What is the initial G load of a Patriot missile
oh,
when front of
I'd
that
have to
container kicks
I'd have
open?
to go look it up, but it's a lot.
Multiple tens of G's, right?
Yeah, it's a lot.
And yet that computer in there functions just like the desktop PC that I'm filming on right now. It doesn't care
It,
because it's designed to do that.
yeah,
And it might have to go very high in the air under extreme circumstances. And they do it every time some sergeant pushes a button inside the cab.
well, I mean, take the Joint Strike Fighter, right? With missiles and missile technology, you typically know what direction your most extreme G forces are going to occur in. But if you
Mm-hmm.
take like the Joint Strike Fighter and some of these fifth gen fighters, you have no idea what direction you're going to take hits. You're going to take a G force load in, and there's just tons of computers all over those things, and they might take 8, 9, 10 G's on a regular basis for extended periods of time, and the shit keeps working. You put my computer through 10 G's, it ain't coming on ever again.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
not.
exactly. But to bring this back around to the Apollo computers, that's what they designed around.
They did. And if you look at like a switch on, everybody points to these things like, oh, look, there's a billion times more computing power in here than there was on Apollo. And that's true. But the difference is, um, here I have this really delicate little screen I have to do things with. There, they have these metal toggle switches. So that if you ever try to hit something on your screen, and be like, oh, I can't quite get it to work right. You have to kind of tap around a little bit. You don't have
Mhm.
time for that on a spacecraft. So they have these toggle switches that were actual metal contact in the back, not some little tiny transistor. So it was just a
Yeah.
different time, right? And the fact that we aren't doing it today doesn't necessarily mean we can't do it today. It just means we're not willing to take those risks and spend that much money, because it's freaking expensive. Um, so I think we should probably leave it there, but I'm going to do another video, Bill, and maybe I'll have you back on for this one. But this is way later. I'm going to try to get a few more people to join, a couple of
Okay.
MIT guys, and we'll tease it today. I got trapped November or something. I was out at some group event that somebody took me to and said, "Hey, we're gonna go meet at this bar and talk about whatever." And of course, wives are on one side and guys are on the other. And I'm not married, so I was just on the guy side. But this guy trapped me, and he's like, "Oh, you're a scientist. I need you to confirm something for me. We all know it's true, but I need you to just back me up because as a scientist, you should know. You know, we're using teletransportation to fund to keep our the people on our Mars colony fed." I wish the dude was making it up. I wish he wasn't serious, but he trapped me for like 45 minutes to try to talk about this. So when I say things about the moon conspiracies, or when I talk about others, and I'm going to do a video on the Kennedy stuff here soon, and the Kennedy stuff actually holds some water. We'll let that's another day. But if you look at this lunar conspiracy thing, anybody who thinks we didn't go to the moon is kind of, I'm going to put them in with the flat earthers because it's just kind of silly talk. It just holds absolutely no water. These things fall apart too fast.
Can I have two closing thoughts?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, because this like got in my bridge work like caraway seeds, and I was really, really, really pissed off about this. So to your audience, and Tim, I know you believe this, there is no political party of woo woo.
Yeah.
Okay. When I first got on Usenet in 1989, it was the loony left that introduced me to moon conspiracy stuff.
Mhm.
Okay. So people out there who are like, yeah, it's the Trumpers who are they're the science denier. No, guys, left, right, insanity knows no political party.
This is true.
Okay. So stop trying to drive that wedge in there. I think whether you're a Democrat, whether you're, you know, a DSA, whether you're a MAGA Republican, whether you're a neocon, I think we can all stand shoulder to shoulder and point at those people and laugh. We might argue about other things, but my God, if you think the earth is flat and that we didn't go to the moon and any host of other absolute insanity, then that's like that should be stamped on your voter ID. Crazy person. Um, the other thing is to briefly address this, the question of, well, we can't go back because, you know, you're going to tell me that we forgot all that technology and stuff. Look at the room around me, folks. Okay, what is this? This is all toys. This is all Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Okay, I knew the people who created Dungeons and Dragons. All right, I knew them. I worked with them. That is much more greater portion of my career life than my brief stint at NASA. Gary Gygax passed away. Dave Arneson passed away. There are people who argue about the rules for classic Dungeons and Dragons because they don't have Dave and Gary to consult with anymore. All right. And the point that this has to do with, oh, we can't go, we never went, and how can you expect us to believe that NASA lost that information? Two guys who made a fun diversion game are gone, and now people can't figure stuff out despite having reams of printed information. They can't quite figure out the intent of certain things. There are so many engineers, so many designers, so many programmers, so many administrators, so many builders for the Apollo project who have sadly passed on, and they took that knowledge with them when they passed away.
Yeah, and even stuff, if you think about it on that note, I've worked on stuff. I've been working on stuff for more years than I care to mention. But one of the stories that sticks with me forever, or will stick with me forever, because I go back and look at some of the projects I worked on once upon a time, and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking here? That doesn't make any sense. My father was a software engineer from 1962 until he retired after 2002 or something.
Mhm.
And I will never forget a phone call he made to me when it was like 1999, 2000, right before the Y2K bug stuff. They were working on Y2K bug fixes because he worked on a lot of banking software. And he called me one day and he was like, I was still I was off at a university someplace, and I was talking to him about a project I was working on, and Dad was starting to kind of open up about a few things. He's like, I got to admit, I was at work today and I was looking at this code going, who the hell would write this kind of shit code? And then he looked at the comment section and he actually wrote it in like 1971. So
Yeah.
it's not that we've forgotten how to do these things. It's just that we're not up to speed on it. If you gave us the blueprints and said, hey, go do this again, and we were willing to take those same risks we took in the 60s, we could do it. It's just a matter of spending the money. And it ain't gonna be cheap. It's not cheap at all to do this kind of stuff. Could we? Sure. Are the people around who did it? No. But even if they were and they were mentally intact and not suffering from dementia, even they'd have to go back and look at it and go, what the hell was I doing? Because I don't remember what I had for lunch 3 weeks ago. Okay. On a Tuesday, I'm not going to remember what I put on some blueprint, back in 1968, right? And I was born in 72, so I can't think that far back, obviously. But
Right.
the point is that nobody can remember that far back. So it's not that we forgot, it's just that we're not in practice. I played piano a lot as a kid. It took me a year of lessons to get back to where I was when I was 15 because I took a 20-year, 25-year break, right? So we haven't forgotten. We just haven't practiced it lately. We got to get back in that sort of routine. So I think I'll leave it with that. But if you don't subscribe to Bill and you're into early edition Dungeons and Dragons or even late edition Dungeons and Dragons or Gamma World or other things in the role playing world, he's the guy. My channel is sort of books that make you think about things and ask questions and sort of do things creatively. And lately, I've been doing some science answering questions stuff. I've got a couple of videos on different scientific topics people had questions about, including one Bill asked. So click like, subscribe, follow, and I'll link over to his channel in probably a pinned comment. So everybody have a great day.